Ethan Carter stepped off the shuttle with a mixture of excitement and unease. The airlock hissed as it sealed behind him, and he took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He wasn't used to being so far from home. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, Ethan had spent most of his life fixing cars and tinkering with old electronics. Space stations were not part of his usual world. But here he was, standing on the edge of something much bigger than anything he'd ever known. The space station loomed around him, its metallic walls gleaming faintly under artificial lights. It was called Nexus Academy, and it orbited Saturn like a silent sentinel watching over the rings below. Ethan had been told it was one of the most advanced research facilities in human history. To him, it just looked like a maze of corridors and blinking control panels. Still, he couldn't deny the awe creeping into his chest as he glanced out a nearby viewport at the swirling orange clouds of the gas giant beyond. He adjusted the strap of his duffel bag on his shoulder and started walking toward the main hall, where new arrivals were supposed to gather. Along the way, he passed scientists in pristine white lab coats, engineers carrying tablets filled with glowing diagrams, and even a few aliens whose elongated limbs and shimmering skin made them look more like sculptures than living beings. Ethan tried not to stare too much, but it was hard. This wasn't exactly what he'd signed up for when he'd applied online months ago. Clara Hayes was waiting in the main hall when Ethan arrived. She stood apart from the others, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if she were trying to hold herself together. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, and her sharp eyes scanned the room with an intensity that made Ethan feel slightly uncomfortable. There was something about her, maybe the way she carried herself, or maybe the thin line of her lips that suggested she didn't trust anyone easily. When Ethan approached, she gave him a quick once-over before speaking. "You must be Ethan," she said, her voice clipped but not unkind. "I'm Clara. We'll be working together." "Nice to meet you," Ethan replied, offering a small smile. He shifted his weight awkwardly, unsure how to act around someone who seemed so serious. "So, what exactly are we doing here?" Clara raised an eyebrow. "They didn't tell you?" "They told me it was important," Ethan admitted. "Something about learning alien tech, that's all I know." Clara sighed and gestured for him to follow her. As they walked, she explained the basics. Nexus Academy had recently acquired a mysterious artifact and object, referred to as the Ether Core. It had been found inside a derelict alien ship drifting near the edge of human-controlled space. No one knew what it did or how it worked, but early tests suggested it was incredibly powerful. Rumors swirled that it could revolutionize energy production, transportation, even medicine. "The problem," Clara continued, "is that no one can figure out how to use it. The symbols on its surface don't match any known language, and attempts to interface with it have failed. That's why we're here to learn." Ethan frowned. "Learn what exactly?" "How to communicate with it," Clara said. "How to understand it. They say it'll take years just to scratch the surface." Years. The word hung heavy in the air between them. Ethan scratched the back of his neck, feeling suddenly out of his depth. Years sounded like a long time, especially for someone like him who preferred solving problems quickly and moving on. But before he could respond, they reached a set of double doors that slid open automatically, revealing a large conference room. Inside, a group of people sat around a circular table, their faces illuminated by holographic displays floating above the surface. At the head of the table stood Professor Langley, a tall man with graying hair and a stern expression. His sharp eyes swept across the room, landing briefly on Ethan and Clara as they entered. "Take your seats," Langley instructed without preamble. His tone left no room for argument. Ethan and Clara found spots at the table and settled in. Langley wasted no time getting started. "Welcome to Nexus Academy," he began, his voice low and commanding. Each of you has been selected based on your unique skills and potential. However, let me make one thing clear. This will not be easy. The ether core is unlike anything humanity has encountered before. Its complexity defies conventional understanding. He paused, letting his words sink in. Around the table, some of the recruits nodded solemnly while others exchanged nervous glances. Ethan leaned back in his chair, trying to appear relaxed. Despite the knot forming in his stomach, Langley continued. We estimate that mastering even the most basic functions of the core could take decades. For those of you hoping for quick results, I urge you to reconsider your expectations. This is not a task for the impatient or the faint-hearted. A murmur rippled through the room, but Ethan barely noticed. His mind was racing. Decades? That seemed impossible. Surely there had to be a faster way. He glanced at Clara, who was scribbling notes furiously on a tablet. She caught his eye and gave him a subtle shrug, as if to say, "Don't ask me. I didn't sign up for this either." As the briefing dragged on, Ethan found himself zoning out. He wasn't great at sitting still for long periods, and the technical jargon Langley kept throwing around only made things worse. Instead, he focused on observing the other recruits. Most of them looked like typical academics, book-smart, detail-oriented, and probably used to following strict rules. Then there was Clara, who seemed determined to prove herself no matter what it took. And finally, there was Ethan himself, a mechanic with grease-stained hands and zero experience in advanced science. When the meeting finally ended, Ethan was the first to stand. He stretched and yawned, drawing a few amused looks from the others. Clara joined him as they filed out of the room. "What do you think?" she asked quietly. Ethan shrugged. "Seems like a lot of talk for something nobody understands." Clara smirked. "That's putting it mildly, but don't underestimate the stakes. If we can crack this thing, it could change everything." Ethan didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure what to think. On one hand, the idea of unlocking alien technology sounded exciting. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong here. What could a guy who fixed broken radios possibly contribute to something this monumental? Their next stop was the lab where the ether core was housed. The moment Ethan laid eyes on it, though, something shifted. The core sat in the center of the room, suspended within a transparent containment field. It was shaped like a jagged crystal, its surface pulsing with soft, iridescent light. Tiny symbols etched into the facets glowed faintly, almost like they were alive. Ethan froze, transfixed. Something about the core called to him, though he couldn't explain why. It wasn't fear or curiosity, it was deeper than that. A pull he couldn't ignore. Clara noticed his reaction and nudged him gently. "You okay?" "Yeah," Ethan said, tearing his gaze away. "Just never seen anything like it." "No one has," Clara replied. "That's the point." For the rest of the day, Ethan found himself drawn back to the core again and again. While the others pored over data logs and debated theories, he simply watched. He didn't touch it, didn't try to analyze it. He just observed, letting his instincts guide him. And as the hours passed, he began to notice patterns in the way the light pulsed and the symbols shifted. Patterns that felt familiar, somehow. By the time evening rolled around, Ethan was certain of one thing. Whatever this core was, it wasn't just a machine. It was alive. And it wanted to be understood. The next morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. The station was quiet, its corridors dimly lit as if it were still night. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was pulling him back to the lab where the ether core was kept. It wasn't curiosity exactly, it felt more like an urge, a quiet voice in the back of his mind telling him to go. He dressed quickly and made his way through the empty halls, his footsteps echoing softly against the metal floors. When he reached the lab, the core was just as he'd left it the day before, glowing faintly inside its containment field. But this time, it seemed brighter, almost as if it knew he was there. Ethan hesitated at the door, glancing around to make sure no one else was watching. Then he stepped closer, tilting his head slightly as he studied the shifting patterns on the crystal surface. The symbols etched into the facets pulsed with light, each one flickering in sequence like a heartbeat. For a moment, he thought. He could hear a faint hum, soft and rhythmic, blending with the low hum of the station systems. Clara arrived a few minutes later, carrying a tablet filled with notes from the previous day. She stopped short when she saw Ethan standing so close to the core, his face inches away from the containment field. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp but not unkind. "Just looking," Ethan replied without turning around. His eyes were fixed on the core, his expression unreadable. "It's different today." Clara frowned and joined him at the edge of the containment field. "Different how?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "It feels louder, I guess, like it's trying to say something." Clara gave him a skeptical look. "It's a machine, Ethan. Machines don't talk." Ethan didn't respond. He reached out slowly, his hand hovering just above the field. For a second, he thought about touching it, but then he pulled back, unsure why he'd even considered it. Instead, he turned to Clara and said, "Do you ever get the feeling it's watching you?" Clara blinked. "Watching me? No, why would it do that?" "I don't know," Ethan muttered. "Forget it." Before Clara could press him further, the rest of the team began filing into the lab. Professor Langley led the group, his usual stern expression firmly in place. Behind him came Dr. Marcus Hawley, a tall man with sharp features and an air of superiority that made Ethan bristle immediately. Hawley carried himself like someone who expected everyone else to bow down to his brilliance, and Ethan had already decided. He didn't like him. "All right," Langley said, clapping his hands together to get everyone's attention. "Let's begin. Today, we'll focus on decoding the symbols on the core's surface. Clara, you'll lead the linguistic analysis. Ethan, you'll assist her." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Assist her? With what?" "With whatever she needs." Langley replied curtly. "You're here to observe and contribute where possible." Ethan opened his mouth to protest but thought better of it. Instead, he nodded and moved to stand beside Clara, who was already setting up her equipment. She handed him a small device that looked like a cross between a camera and a scanner. "Hold this near the core," she instructed. "It'll record the patterns of light and send the data to my tablet." Ethan did as he was told, holding the device steady while Clara tapped away at her screen. Around them, the others busied themselves with their own tasks, some analyzing energy readings, others running simulations based on the core's behavior. The room buzzed with activity, but Ethan found it hard to concentrate. His attention kept drifting back to the core itself, its glow growing brighter with each passing minute. After about an hour, Clara let out an exasperated sigh. "This isn't working," she muttered under her breath. "The symbols keep changing too fast. I can't find any consistent patterns." Ethan glanced at her, then back at the core. Without thinking, he said, "Maybe you're overthinking it." Clara shot him a glare. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means maybe it's not about patterns or rules," Ethan explained. "Maybe it's about listening." "Listening?" Clara repeated, her tone dripping with skepticism. "To what? It's a machine, remember?" Ethan shrugged. "I don't know. Just a thought." Clara rolled her eyes and went back to her work, but Ethan couldn't shake the idea. Listening. That's what it felt like the core wanted, not analysis or study, but someone to pay attention. Someone to understand. By mid-morning, frustration was starting to spread through the team. The core remained stubbornly silent, refusing to yield any useful information. Even Clara, who prided herself on her patience, was beginning to lose her cool. She snapped at one of the engineers for interrupting her train of thought, then apologized immediately afterward, clearly embarrassed by her outburst. Ethan, meanwhile, had taken a seat near the edge of the containment field. He wasn't doing anything particularly productive. He just sat there, staring at the core, letting his mind wander. Every now and then, he'd jot something down in a notebook. Though no one could tell what he was writing. Dr. Halley noticed and approached him, his lip curling into a sneer. "Shouldn't you be helping, Clara?" he asked pointedly. "I am," Ethan replied without looking up. "Thinking counts as helping." Halley snorted. "Thinking won't get us anywhere. We need results." "And you think yelling at people will help?" Ethan shot back, finally meeting Hale's gaze. "Seems like all you've done so far is complain." Hale's face darkened, but before he could respond, Clara stepped in. "Enough," she said firmly. "We don't have time for arguments. Let's focus on the task at hand." Halley glared at Ethan one last time before walking away, muttering under his breath. Clara gave Ethan a warning look, but he just shrugged and went back to his notebook. A little while later, Clara called the team together for a quick update. She summarized their progress or lack thereof and outlined a new strategy for the afternoon. As she spoke, Ethan noticed something odd happening with the core. Its glow had intensified again, and the symbols on its surface were moving faster than before. They seemed almost frantic, as if the core were trying to convey something urgent. Clara finished speaking. Ethan raised his hand tentatively. "Can I try something?" Everyone turned to look at him, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. Clara tilted her head. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to touch it," Ethan said simply. The room fell silent. Even Langley raised an eyebrow. "That's highly irregular," he said. "We don't know what kind of reaction that might trigger." "I'll be careful," Ethan promised. "I just feel like it might help." Clara crossed her arms. "Feel like?" "That's not exactly scientific reasoning." "I know," Ethan admitted. "But sometimes science doesn't explain everything." Langley hesitated, clearly torn. Finally he nodded. "Very well. But proceed with caution." Ethan stood up and walked to the edge of the containment field. A technician adjusted the settings, lowering the barrier just enough for him to reach through. Taking a deep breath, Ethan extended his hand toward the core. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, a jolt of energy surged through him, making his whole body tingle. Room erupted into chaos. Alarms blared, lights flashed, and the core began pulsing wildly, its glow filling the entire lab. Clara shouted for Ethan to pull back, but he didn't move. Instead, he closed his eyes and focused on the sensation coursing through him. It wasn't painful, just overwhelming, like being flooded with information too quickly to process. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the commotion died down. The alarms stopped, the lights returned to normal, and the core settled back into its usual rhythm. Everyone stared at Ethan, wide-eyed and speechless. "What just happened?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan opened his eyes and looked at her. I think it trusts me." The lab was eerily quiet after what had just happened. Everyone stood frozen, their eyes locked on Ethan, who still had his hand resting lightly on the ether core. The core itself seemed calmer now, its glow steady and soft, almost like it was breathing slowly. Clara was the first to break the silence. "Ethan," she said cautiously, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you okay?" Ethan blinked a few times, as if waking up from a dream. He pulled his hand away from the core and flexed his fingers, looking down at them as though expecting to see some kind of mark or change. But there was nothing, just his usual calloused hands, the same ones that had fixed countless cars and gadgets back home. "I'm fine," he said finally, turning to face the group. I think it wanted me to touch it." Clara shook her head, clearly struggling to process what she'd just witnessed. "Wanted? It's a machine, Ethan. Machines don't want things." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe not, but something happened. I felt connected to it, like it was showing me something." Professor Langley stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Explain yourself, Mr. Carter. What did you feel? Ethan hesitated, trying to put the experience into words. It's hard to describe. It was like waves of information, but not in a language. More like feelings or pictures. I saw patterns, shapes, colors all moving really fast. And then, it slowed down. Felt like it was waiting for me to understand. Langley exchanged a glance with Clara, then turned back to Ethan. This is unprecedented, he admitted. No one else has reported such a reaction during physical contact with the core. We need to document this immediately. Before anyone could say another word, Dr. Marcus Hawley stormed up to Ethan, his face flushed with anger. This is reckless, he snapped. You had no idea what might happen. You could have damaged the core, or worse, triggered some kind of catastrophic event. Ethan raised an eyebrow. But I didn't. And look, it's fine. That's not the point, Hawley shot back. We're dealing with alien technology here, not some junkyard engine you can tinker with on a whim. Ethan clenched his jaw but didn't respond. He knew Hawley was trying to provoke him, but arguing wouldn't help. Instead, he turned to Langley. What do we do now? Langley rubbed his temples, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he sighed. We proceed carefully. Ethan, you'll continue working directly with the core under close supervision. Clara, monitor his interactions and record everything. If this connection is real and repeatable, we may be closer to understanding the artifact than we thought. Hawley opened his mouth to protest, but Langley cut him off with a sharp look. That's final, Dr. Hawley. Unless you have a better suggestion? Hawley glared but stayed silent, retreating to the corner of the lab where he began muttering to himself while typing furiously on his tablet. Clara, meanwhile, approached Ethan with a mixture of curiosity and concern. You sure you're okay? She asked again, lowering her voice so only he could hear. Ethan nodded. Yeah, just tired, I guess. It was intense. Clara studied him for a moment before nodding. All right. Let's take it slow. Don't push yourself too hard. Over the next few hours, Ethan worked closely with the core, guided by Clara's careful instructions. At first, they kept things simple, observing how the core reacted to different stimuli, like sound frequencies or light pulses. Each time Ethan touched the core, it responded differently, sometimes glowing brighter, other times emitting soft tones that resonated through the lab. By lunchtime, Ethan had begun experimenting with more direct interaction, with Clara recording every move. He placed both hands on the core and closed his eyes, focusing on the sensations he'd felt earlier. This time, the images came faster and clearer, maps of star systems, intricate designs that looked like blueprints, even fleeting glimpses of alien creatures with elongated limbs and shimmering skin. When he opened his eyes, Clara was staring at him, her tablet filled with notes and diagrams. You're doing it, she whispered, awe creeping into her voice. You're actually communicating with it, Ethan smiled faintly. Feels more like listening, like it's teaching me. Clara frowned. Teaching you what? I don't know yet, Ethan admitted. But it's important. I can feel it. Word of Ethan's progress spread quickly through the station. By mid-afternoon, other researchers began gathering outside the lab, eager to catch a glimpse of the mechanic-turned-prodigy. Some were skeptical, whispering about luck or coincidence, while others watched in stunned silence as Ethan demonstrated increasingly complex interactions with the core. One particularly impressive moment came when Ethan managed to activate a feature no one had been able to trigger before, a holographic projection of a distant solar system. The image floated above the core, rotating slowly as tiny lights representing planets and moons orbited a central star. Gasps rippled through the crowd as details became visible: rings around a gas giant, icy debris fields, even signs of artificial structures orbiting one of the inner planets. How did you do that? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan shrugged. I just asked it to show me something big. Guess this qualifies. Clara shook her head in disbelief. You make it sound so easy. It's not, Ethan replied. It's exhausting. Feels like my brain's running a marathon every time I try something new. Despite the fatigue, Ethan pressed on, determined to learn as much as he could. By the end of the day, he had mastered several basic functions of the core, including generating protective energy shields and manipulating gravitational fields within the lab. Each success brought cheers from the team, though Ethan remained oddly humble, brushing off praise with a shrugged as the sun set over Saturn's rings, or rather, as the station's artificial lighting shifted to simulate nightfall. The group gathered for a debriefing session. Langley led the discussion, his tone equal parts excitement and caution. What we've witnessed today is nothing short of extraordinary, he began. Ethan's ability to interface with the ether core represents a breakthrough far beyond our expectations. However, we must remain vigilant. We still don't fully understand the nature of this connection or its potential risks. Hawley, predictably, seized the opportunity to voice his concerns. Exactly. For all we know, the so-called connection could be dangerous. What if the core is influencing him? Controlling him? Ethan rolled his eyes but didn't argue. He was too tired to care what Hawley thought. Clara, however, stepped in to defend him. For someone supposedly controlled by an alien artifact, Ethan seems remarkably lucid, she pointed out. If anything, his actions suggest cooperation, not domination. Hawley scowled but didn't respond. Langley cleared his throat, steering the conversation back on track. Regardless of the risks, he said, we cannot ignore the opportunities presented by Ethan's unique abilities. Tomorrow we'll focus on expanding his understanding of the core's capabilities. In the meantime, everyone should get some rest. As the meeting ended, Ethan lingered in the lab, staring at the core. Its glow had dimmed slightly, almost as if it were sleeping. Clara joined him, leaning against the edge of the containment field. You've done incredible work today, she said softly. Do you realize that? Ethan chuckled. Feels weird being called incredible for touching a rock. It's not just a rock, Clara reminded him. And whatever's happening between you and it's changing everything. Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the core. Yeah, I just hope I'm ready for it. Clara placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You will be. One step at a time. With that, they left the lab together, the hum of the core fading behind them as they headed toward their quarters. Outside, the stars twinkled faintly through the station's viewports, a reminder of the vast universe waiting to be explored and understood. The next morning, Ethan woke up feeling groggy. His head was heavy, like he'd spent the night solving 1,000 puzzles instead of sleeping. He sat up slowly, rubbing his temples as fragments of dreams drifted through his mind-strange visions. Of glowing symbols, swirling galaxies, and voices speaking in languages he didn't understand. They weren't nightmares exactly, but they left him unsettled, as though his brain had been working overtime, even while he slept. He got dressed and headed to the lab, where Clara was already waiting. She looked up from her tablet as he entered, her expression tense. You look tired, she said, tilting her head slightly. Did you sleep okay? Not really, Ethan admitted. Kept dreaming about stuff. What kind of stuff? He hesitated, unsure how much to share. Just things I saw when I touched the core yesterday. Symbols, maps, weird sounds. It's like my brain won't stop thinking about it. Clara frowned. That's not normal. Maybe you should take it easy today. Ethan shook his head. No way. I feel like there's more to learn. Besides, everyone's counting on me. Clara opened her mouth to argue, but thought better of it. Instead, she handed him a cup of coffee. At least drink this first. As they prepared for another day of testing, tensions in the lab were running high. Dr. Marcus Hawley had made no secret of his distrust toward Ethan, muttering under his breath about reckless amateurs and unnecessary risks. Some of the other researchers seemed uneasy too, whispering among themselves whenever Ethan approached the core. Even Professor Langley, usually calm and collected, appeared more cautious than usual, watching Ethan closely as if waiting for something to go wrong. Despite the growing unease, Ethan pressed on. With Clara monitoring every move, he resumed his experiments, focusing on mastering new functions of the ether core. Each time he touched it, the connection felt stronger, almost instinctive. He could feel the core responding to his thoughts, adapting to his intentions like an extension of himself. That by mid-morning, Ethan had unlocked a new ability, a gravity manipulation field that allowed him to lift objects without touching them. At first, he practiced with small items like tools and notebooks, making them hover in the air before gently lowering them back down. Then, emboldened by his success, he tried something bigger, a metal chair. The moment he focused, the chair rose smoothly into the air, spinning slowly as if caught in an invisible current. The room erupted into murmurs of amazement. Even Hawley couldn't hide his shock, though he quickly masked it with a scowl. Clara, meanwhile, stared at Ethan with wide eyes. "This is incredible," she breathed. "You're doing things we've only theorized about." Ethan grinned, though the effort was starting to wear on him. His hands trembled slightly as he released the chair, letting it drop back to the floor with a soft thud. "Yeah, well, don't get used to it. This is exhausting." Clara nodded, concern flickering across her face. "Take a break. You're pushing yourself too hard." But Ethan shook his head. "Not yet. There's still more." As the day wore on, Ethan continued to push the limits of what he could do. With the core, he activated energy shields capable of deflecting laser blasts, generated holographic projections of alien landscapes, and even created a miniature wormhole that shimmered briefly before collapsing in on itself. Each achievement brought cheers from the team, though Ethan remained oddly detached, as if he were operating on autopilot. By lunchtime, however, the strain was becoming obvious. Ethan's movements grew sluggish, his responses delayed. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. When Clara suggested taking a break again, he finally relented, sinking into a chair near the edge of the containment field. "I'm fine," he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Just need a minute." Clara knelt beside him, her tone gentle but firm. "You're not fine. Whatever's happening between you and the core, it's taking a toll on you. You need to rest." Before Ethan could respond, the core began pulsing brightly, its glow intensifying until it filled the entire lab. Everyone froze, their attention drawn to the artifact. For a moment, it seemed to hum louder, almost like it was calling out to Ethan specifically. "What's going on?" Clara asked, her voice tinged with alarm. Ethan didn't answer. He stood up slowly, drawn to the core despite his exhaustion. As he reached out to touch it, Clara grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said sharply. "Something's wrong." "It's okay," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "It's just talking to me." Ignoring her protests, he placed his hand on the core. Instantly, a surge of energy coursed through him, stronger than anything he'd felt before. Images flooded his mind, alien cities crumbling under storms of fire, ships fleeing across star-filled skies, voices shouting warnings in languages he couldn't comprehend. Pain shot through his body, sharp and unrelenting, forcing him to his knees. "Ethan," Clara shouted, rushing to his side. "Let go of it." But Ethan couldn't. The core held him fast, its grip unyielding. Around them, alarms blared as the lab's systems went haywire. Lights flickered, equipment sparked, and the containment field surrounding the core began to destabilize. Hawley burst into the room, shouting orders to shut everything down. "Cut the power, now!" "No," Ethan gasped, his voice strained. "You'll make it worse. We can't risk losing the station." Hawley snapped, gesturing for technicians to override the controls. Ethan clenched his teeth, fighting against the pain. Through the chaos, he focused on the core, trying to communicate with it silently. "Stop," he thought desperately. "Please stop." To everyone's astonishment, the core obeyed. Its glow dimmed, the alarms ceased, and the lab fell silent once more. Ethan collapsed onto the floor, breathing heavily, his body trembling with fatigue. Clara dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering uncertainly. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," Ethan muttered, though his face was pale. "Just give me a second." Langley rushed over, his expression a mix of relief and frustration. "What happened?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "It showed me things, bad things, like it was warning me." "Warning you about what?" Clara pressed. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know, but it felt urgent." Hawley stepped forward, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "This is exactly what I warned about. That thing is dangerous. We should shut it down before someone gets killed." "No," Ethan said firmly, struggling to sit up. "It's not dangerous, not on purpose. It's trying to help us." "Help us how?" Hawley demanded. "By frying your brain?" "He's right," Clara interjected, surprising everyone. "Whatever just happened, it wasn't random. The core reacted because Ethan pushed too far. We need to understand why not. Panic and shut it down." Langley rubbed his temples, clearly torn. Finally he sighed. "All right. We'll continue, but with stricter protocols. Ethan, you'll take mandatory breaks every hour. And Clara, monitor his vitals closely. If anything looks off, we stop immediately." Hawley glared, but didn't argue further. Instead, he stormed out of the lab, muttering about incompetence and recklessness. After a short rest, Ethan returned to work, though he moved more cautiously this time. Under Clara's watchful eye, he focused on simpler tasks, avoiding anything that might trigger another overload. Despite his earlier collapse, he refused to give up, determined to uncover the meaning behind the visions he'd seen. As the day drew to a close, Ethan sat alone in the lab, staring at the core. Its glow had returned to its usual soft rhythm, almost comforting now. He leaned closer, whispering softly, "What are you trying to tell me?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly, the core pulsed once, a single deliberate beat that seemed to echo in Ethan's chest. He smiled faintly, feeling a spark of hope. "Okay," he murmured. "I'm listening." The next morning, Ethan woke up with a strange sense of purpose. The visions from the day before lingered in his mind, vivid and unsettling. Alien cities burning, ships fleeing across the stars, voices shouting warnings he couldn't shake. The feeling that the core was trying to show him something important, something urgent. He arrived at the lab early, finding Clara already there. She looked up as he entered, her expression softening slightly when she saw how tired he still looked. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Ethan nodded. "I have to be. The core showed me those things for a reason. I need to figure out what it means." Clara hesitated, then handed him a small device clipped to a wristband. "This will monitor your vitals. If anything spikes heart rate, brain activity, we'll know immediately." Ethan strapped it on without complaint, though he didn't like the idea of being watched so closely. Still, he understood why it was necessary. After yesterday's episode, no one wanted to take any chances, not even him. As the team gathered for another of experiments, Ethan noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Some of the researchers seemed more cautious around him now, keeping their distance as if afraid he might collapse again. Others, however, looked at him with a mix of awe and curiosity, whispering about his connection to the core, like it was some kind of miracle. Dr. Marcus Hawley was conspicuously absent, having retreated to his quarters after loudly declaring that Ethan's reckless antics were putting the entire station at risk. Even Professor Langley appeared more reserved than usual, his usual confidence replaced by a quiet tension. "All right," Langley said, addressing the group. "Today, we focus on understanding the nature of Ethan's bond with the Corps. Clara, keep detailed records of every interaction. And remember, the safety of this facility is our top priority." Ethan nodded, stepping closer to the containment field. As he reached out to touch the core, Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "Take it slow," she reminded him. "Don't push too hard." "I won't," Ethan promised. He took a deep breath and placed his hand gently on the artifact's surface. This time, the connection felt different. Instead of overwhelming him with images and sensations, the core seemed to hum softly, almost like it was waiting for him to ask a question. Ethan closed his eyes, focusing on the feelings coursing through him. "What are you trying to tell me?" he thought, directing the question toward the core. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly, he began to see shapes forming in his mind, symbols, patterns, maps of distant star systems. But these weren't random. They were connected, leading to a specific location deep in uncharted space. At the center of it all was a planet surrounded by debris fields and glowing with an eerie red light. Ethan opened his eyes, his heart racing. "It's showing me where to go." Clara leaned in, her voice low but urgent. "Where?" "A planet," Ethan replied. "Far away, it feels important." Before anyone could respond, the core pulsed brightly, projecting a holographic map above its surface. The image rotated slowly, zooming in on the mysterious planet until details became visible, a jagged landscape scarred by craters, strange structures rising from the ground like ruins, and a massive crater dominating the northern hemisphere. Professor Langley stepped forward, his eyes widening as he studied the projection. "This changes everything. If the core is guiding U.S. to this location, it must hold critical information or resources." Hawley reappeared just in time to hear Langley's statement. His face twisted into a scowl. "Or it could be a trap. We don't know what's out there." "We can't ignore this," Clara argued. "The core wouldn't lead us somewhere dangerous without warning." "And how do you know that?" Hawley snapped. "Because Ethan says so. He's just guessing." Ethan clenched his fists, fighting the urge to argue back. Instead, he turned to Langley. "Let me try something else. Maybe I can get more details." Langley hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead. But be careful." Ethan focused again, letting the core guide him deeper into its memories. This time, the images came faster scenes of destruction. Battles fought among the stars. Fleets of alien ships converging on the mysterious planet. Amidst the chaos, Ethan caught glimpses of creatures unlike anything he'd ever seen before. They were tall and slender, their bodies shimmering with iridescent colors. Their faces were serene yet sad, as if burdened by a great weight. "They created the core," Ethan whispered, opening his eyes. "They built it to protect something or someone." "Protect what?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted. "But whatever it is, it's still out there. On that planet." Langley exchanged a glance with Clara, then turned to address the team. "We need to prepare for an expedition. If the core is leading us to this location, it's our duty to investigate." Hawley threw up his hands in frustration. "This is insane. We're talking about traveling to the edge of known space, based on guesses and hunches." "It's not a guess," Ethan said firmly. "The core knows what it's doing. It's helping us." Hawley scoffed but didn't argue further. Instead, he stormed out of the lab, muttering under his breath about incompetence and wasted resources. As the meeting ended, Clara pulled Ethan aside. "Are you sure about this?" "Going out there, it's dangerous." "I'm sure," Ethan replied. "If the core thinks it's important, then it is. Besides, I feel like I owe it. It's been teaching me, trusting me. I can't turn my back on that." Clara sighed, shaking her head. Just promise me one thing. What? Don't do anything stupid. Ethan smiled faintly. No promises. Over. The next few days, preparations for the expedition moved quickly. A small crew was assembled, including Ethan, Clara, Langley, and a handful of engineers and security personnel. Supplies were loaded onto a reconnaissance ship docked at the station, and flight plans were drawn up based on the coordinates provided by the Corps. On the morning of the mission, Ethan stood near the airlock, staring out at the sleek vessel that would carry them across the galaxy. The ship gleamed under the artificial lights, its engines humming softly as technicians performed final checks. "You nervous?" Clara asked, joining him. "A little," Ethan admitted. "But mostly excited. Feels like we're about to find something big." Clara nodded, though her expression remained tense. "Just don't forget, you're not invincible. Whatever happens, out there, we stick together." "Deal," Ethan said, offering a small smile as the boarding call echoed through the station. The team filed onto the ship. Ethan took one last look at the Corps, its glow steady and calm as if reassuring him. He nodded silently, then stepped aboard. The journey began smoothly, the ship slipping into hyperspace within hours of departure. For the first time in days, Ethan felt a sense of peace. The visions had stopped, replaced by a quiet certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. But as the ship approached the mysterious planet, unease began to creep in. The closer they got, the more the Corps reacted, pulsing erratically and emitting faint tones that resonated throughout the vessel. Ethan spent long hours sitting near the artifact, trying to understand its messages. Finally, as they entered orbit, around the planet, the Corps projected a single word onto the ship's main screen, a phrase written in glowing symbols that none of them recognized. "What does it mean?" Clara asked, frowning at the display. Ethan stared at the symbols, his brow furrowed in concentration. Slowly the meaning came to him, clear and undeniable. It means home. The ship descended through the planet's atmosphere, its hull trembling slightly as it pushed through thick clouds of red dust. Below them, the jagged landscape stretched endlessly, craters, ruins, and strange metallic structures jutting out like broken teeth against the crimson sky. Ethan sat near the viewport, his eyes fixed on the alien world unfolding beneath them. The Corps rested securely in its containment field nearby, glowing steadily as if guiding their path. "This place feels wrong," Clara muttered, standing beside him. Her voice was quiet but carried a note of unease. Ethan nodded. "It's not just the looks. It's the air, or whatever's left of it. Feels heavy." Clara glanced at him, her brow furrowing. "You think the Corps knows what happened here?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But I'm starting to think this isn't just about finding something. It's about understanding why it's gone." As the ship touched down near the massive crater dominating the northern hemisphere, the team gathered in the main cabin for one last briefing. Professor Langley stood at the front, his expression serious but resolute. "Our mission is simple," he began. "We locate whatever the Corps is leading us to, document our findings, and return safely. Stick together, stay alert, and avoid unnecessary risks." Hale, who had been reluctantly dragged along, crossed his arms and rolled his eyes. "Easy for you to say. We're walking into the unknown with nothing but guesses." "Not guesses," Ethan said firmly, cutting him off. "The Corps brought us here for a reason. Trust it or trust me." Hale opened his mouth to argue, but stopped when Clara shot him a warning glare. Instead, he muttered under his breath and turned away. Once outside, the team moved cautiously across the barren terrain. The ground was uneven, littered with shards of metal and fragments of stone that gleamed faintly under the dim sunlight. The air was thin and cold, forcing everyone to rely on their suits' life support systems. Despite the harsh conditions, Ethan felt oddly calm, as if the Corps were shielding him from fear. They followed the map projected by the artifact, weaving between towering ruins until they reached the edge of the massive crater. Peering over the rim, they saw something extraordinary, a vast structure buried deep within the pit, its surface covered in intricate carvings that pulsed faintly with light. "That's it," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's what we're looking for." Langley adjusted his helmet's visor, studying the structure intently. "Let's move carefully. We don't know what kind of traps or defenses might be waiting." The descent into the crater was slow and treacherous, the brittle ground crumbling beneath their boots. As they neared the structure, the core grew brighter, its hum growing louder with each step. When they finally reached the entrance, a gaping archway framed by glowing runes, Ethan hesitated. "What is it?" Clara asked, noticing his pause. "It's calling me," Ethan replied, his gaze locked on the doorway. "Like it wants me to go inside alone." "No way," Clara said sharply. "You're not going in there without backup." Before anyone could stop him, Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand on the frame. Instantly, the runes flared to life, bathing the area in warm golden light. A low rumble echoed through the crater as the doors slid open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. "Stay close," Ethan said, turning back to the group. "I'll lead." Inside, the air felt different, thicker, almost alive. The walls shimmered faintly, covered in patterns that shifted and changed as they moved deeper into the structure. The core pulsed rhythmically in Ethan's hands, guiding him forward like a compass pointing true north. After several minutes of walking, they entered a large chamber filled with strange machinery. At the center stood a pedestal, atop which rested another crystal-like object similar to the core. Unlike the one they'd brought, this artifact was cracked and dull, its glow nearly extinguished. Ethan approached cautiously, kneeling beside the pedestal. As he touched the damaged core, a flood of images assaulted his mind, images far darker than anything he'd seen before. Alien armies clashing, cities reduced to ash, voices screaming in despair, and then silence. Total and absolute. "They destroyed themselves," Ethan murmured, pulling his hand away. "This core, it was meant to protect them, to save them. But they didn't listen." Clara knelt beside him, her voice trembling. "What do you mean they didn't listen?" "They used it wrong," Ethan explained. "They took its power for granted, twisted it into weapons instead of tools. In the end, it couldn't stop them from tearing each other apart." A heavy silence fell over the group as the weight of Ethan's words sank in. Even Holly seemed shaken, his usual skepticism replaced by a grim realization. "So this is it?" Clara asked softly. "Their home, their civilization, wiped out because they couldn't control themselves." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, that's why the core brought us here. To show us what happens when we lose sight of what matters." Before anyone could respond, the damaged core let out a faint pulse, drawing their attention. Slowly it began to glow. Again, its light weak but steady. Ethan placed the ether core next to it, watching as the two artifacts resonated together, their combined energy filling the chamber with warmth. "What's happening?" Langley asked, his voice tinged with awe. "It's healing," Ethan said simply. "The core is fixing it, giving it a second chance." For a moment, the room was bathed in brilliant light, so bright that everyone had to shield their eyes. When the glow faded, the damaged core sat whole once more, its surface gleaming like new. The machinery around them hummed softly, coming to life as if awakening from a long slumber. "We did it," Clara whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "We actually fixed it." Ethan smiled faintly, though his expression remained somber. "Not us, the core. It knew what needed to be done all along." As they prepared to leave the chamber, Ethan lingered for a moment, staring at the restored artifact. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that they'd accomplished something greater than any of them had imagined. But he also felt a responsibility, a reminder that humanity would face the same choice someday. Back aboard the ship, The journey home was quiet. No one spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts. Ethan sat near the viewport, gazing out at the stars streaking past in streaks of light. The core rested nearby, its glow softer now, almost content. "You okay?" Clara asked, sitting beside him. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how easy it is to mess things up," he admitted. "And how hard it is to fix them." Clara nodded slowly. "Maybe that's why the core chose you. You understand that better than anyone." Ethan chuckled softly. Or maybe it just got lucky. When they returned to Nexus Academy, the team was greeted as heroes. News of their discovery spread quickly, sparking debates about the implications of the core's origins and the lessons learned from the alien civilization's downfall. For Ethan, however, the mission marked the beginning of a new chapter. He continued working with the core, teaching others how to interact with it safely and responsibly. Clara stayed by his side, documenting every breakthrough and ensuring that no one repeated the mistakes of the past. Together, they became advocates for using the core's power wisely, reminding everyone that knowledge came with consequences. In the end, Ethan realized that mastering the core wasn't about speed or skill, it was about listening. Listening to the whispers of history, the warnings of those who came before, and the quiet voice inside telling him to choose wisely. And as long as he kept listening, he knew they'd find their way forward together.